Hey, it's summer and we're back with the summer series. How unexpected or expected. uh, so I'm happy to be going back in time again. And of course, like every year, we're going back in time exactly 6 years to in order to take a look at how we did at the 2015 UDL Prospects Draft. And that's all the introduction, and we are going to head right into the draft itself. Like every time, I'm not going to go name by name, but yeah, it was this draft, the McJesus draft, and naturally it's going to be remembered for it because it's like the most generational talent of the last 10 years. But of course, I'm gonna link it below, and you can check the Google spreadsheet with all the current stats of all players selected, and also where are they now in terms of the teams in the NHL or otherwise. So you can take a look at that, and also take a look at what your draft class was, or the other teams, etc. Because we're not going to be looking at the individual pick by pick right now. What we will look at the overall picture of the draft, and how does it compare with other drafts, and some overall numbers. But before that, here's a quick trivia question to think about while I ramble on here a few minutes. And which player do you think has the most penalty minutes from that 2015 UDL draft class? And I mean, so far in his career. I'll tell you the answer in a bit, but now let's look at some graphs. This is the traditional quality versus quantity per draft round graph, which we see here. The orange dotted line is the points per game, which is basically correlates with the quality of the players drafted, and the blue line is the games played per player selected in that round. And naturally, the drop between the first and the second round of the points per game is quite steep, and this is due to the top end talent that was available in this draft year. But for me, more impressive is the consistent in the number of games played that we managed to find in the latter rounds. And you can see also that between the third and the fifth round, the quality of the so to say the average quality of the players that we selected is pretty comparable. So the third to fifth rounds doesn't seem to have made much difference in terms of where did we pick. And but compared to some of the previous seasons, the blue curve, the blue line was quite steeper, and quite deeper, and went quite deeper in previous seasons. So I actually think we did pretty well, which we can also see in the next graph, that is where are they now graph. And amazingly, 67% or two-thirds of the 100 players we selected in 2015 are still in the NHL, which is quite a lot higher than the average percentage of 56-ish from the previous season. So around 10% better in terms of finding NHL talents for all of the league. And you can see the distribution between the other leagues, and there are no players who are inactive or retired. Every one of the selections is still active and playing in some leagues. And there were no like very exotic leagues that playing. I think the Austrian league was, and there was one player playing in the Norwegian league that were like the lowest leagues that I noticed. And in terms of the age distribution, in 2015 we were a bit higher than the average on the 18 and 19 years old, but surprisingly few 20-year-olds were drafted. And then again, like you see, not huge differences, not a lot of older guys, but we will see in the 27 plus category, which is no longer available for the prospect draft. We had one exhibit. So that's all for the overall. And to come back to the trivia question, I don't know if any of you had guessed right, but the leader is Brandon Manning, and he's not even in the NHL any longer, but he was for a couple of years. And here is a clash of firsts, so the leading penalty minute getter of the round versus the leading point getter of the draft, not of the round. But he managed to put up quite the penalty minutes before he had to leave the NHL. So on to the traditional top 10s that we do each draft revisit. Naturally, the first is the top 10 of the best players of the draft, not looking at where they were selected. So here we don't give bonus points for late selections, it's just based on the production. And here are the top 10. Like always, we can debate, but I think the first place is not up for debate, and it's he's head and shoulders above his class. Although it was expected to be closer between him and Eichel, but as you see, Eichel is outside of the top 3 here because of Panarin, who is arguably being the second best player of the draft. Although you can say that he came more experienced and more ready, but it's hard to argue against his totals. And Mitch Marner here edges Eichel for the third spot, and then Mikko Rantanen is, I think, the final one who concludes this top tier of the draft. So the cream of the crop is really up to the top 5, and then the other are not half bad. The other 5 in the top 10, and a lot more closer between them. And for me, Juuse Saros, we will likely, if we make this table in a couple of seasons, he will likely climb a bit. But he took quite a long time to get the starting job, so his stats are not that impressive yet. And if you don't remember from previous seasons, the color code here is that the greens are players who are still with their drafting team, and the blacks are ones who have been traded away, and these are the drafting teams, not their current teams. So basically Brad selected Saros, and at some point of time he traded him away. The same with Mike and Rantanen. But it's impressive to see 8 out of the 10 still with their drafting teams, which is, I think, the most I've seen in any of the top 10s we've done so far. But don't quote me on that. The next top 10 is about the best value picks. So here the conditions, to remind everyone, are the picked in the 3rd round or later, and of course according to their productions. So here is the list, and the top spot goes to Colton Parayko, and who has been 4th round selection of the Sparta Warriors and is still playing for them. Shesterkin comes in 2nd place, mostly because he hasn't put up as many games yet, but he's also on the rise. And Josh Anderson is an amazing pick in the 5th round, in the bottom of the 5th round by Elliott and Hanover Turtles. And he came in, I think he was selected and came or started playing in the NHL right away. he was really late selection or overage selection. Maybe that's where Elliot got his reputation for drafting overagers. And towards the latter part of this top 10, also some solid selections, although not overly spectacular. Atlanta comes here with two selections that were made by Donny, their original owner. Again, some solid players here, but not really super amazing hits out of the later rounds. And an interesting story about the Dano pick by the Wanderers here is that they actually this is the original post for that selection. It was Andrew Hammond. I don't know if we have had another selection with the question mark, but he was ineligible according to the rules back then, before we changed it to 30 games to be eligible for goalies in the prospect draft. And to replace the Hamburger potential selection, the Wanderers selected Dano, which arguably saved them from making a not so good selection, so Dano turned out to be a lot better. But that was something that I found in the books during the draft. So in the final top 10 selection, the swing and a miss one, so the top 10 busts, which is defined by players selected in the top 2 rounds that didn't reach their potential. And this is the list, and this is the 27 and older player that I referred to earlier. And I think for sure it's a selection that Brad doesn't need to be reminded of. And actually Scott Darling's numbers don't seem that bad, but keep in mind that the best part of these numbers were actually accrued before his selection in the draft, and he regressed heavily after that, and basically it's now he's now an NHL afterthought. Evgeny Svechnikov was also quite a miss by the Tigers, and then here we have 3 appearances by the Mighty Camels. So Clint wasn't exactly hitting it out of the park in this draft. And another story, although it might be funny for others, but for me it was quite bitter, because I remember I had the 2-4 or 2-5 selection, so the 24th or 25th overall selection, and I had a certain player I wanted, and it was Brock Besser, but he went at 2-2, so I was like, damn it, I don't want anyone else. So I traded down, and not even this skinny Russian intrigues me. And then I got Bittner, who basically bit the dust. So anyway, and that was also not interesting that both players, the only 2 players that are still with their drafting team from this table are 2 of the famously not so good Boston selections in that 2015 first round in the actual NHL draft. And actually I think we could be excused that we also reached on them, or some of our teams reached on them too. So looking at the overall picture, not the NHL but the UDL after 6 years, so how well did each of our teams draft? And this is again the table that I put together and make some perfectly objective roto rankings. Of course not, but based on the number of NHL regulars that the draft produced, the average number of games played per player, and so on. So this is the result, and Montreal and Kansas City got the best score, so they had solid drafts. Also Atlanta, Sparta, and so on. We had these first 4 teams. They got quite solid NHLers. These next 3 teams, the Aces, Macon, which is now of course Orlando, and Las Vegas, they got a better top end talent, but not so much as in terms of talent. And also here the average draft position is taken into account. So basically the teams who drafted earlier are, so to say, penalized by the Roto rankings because they had advantageous positions. So as you see here, Elliot, I've taken into account the Turtles' last average drafting position, so they have been bonified, bonificated. I don't know what's the word for giving you a bonus. So anyway, on the rightmost you see who is still with the drafting team, and the green ones are ones who are still on their farm contracts. And here this Lindgren is Jesper Lindgren and not Ryan Lindgren, who is another Lindgren. But Jesper Lindgren, I think he never made it to the NHL, but he's still on the farm in Sparta. So taking a quick look at some of the teams, for example, Montreal, here is their draft class. As you see, the Slepyshev is the only one who is who didn't have a long NHL career. Like we mentioned, Manning is no longer in the NHL, but he was a contributor for most of the last 6 years, and also, and basically solid NHLers throughout. So it's a completely other question how many of them were remained with the Wanderers and for how long, because this is a topic of another video maybe that we usually discuss the trades. And this is the Scouts draft class. Again, pretty solid, even if not overly spectacular, but against solid NHLers. Michael Furman, he had a couple of very good fantasy seasons, and unfortunately his career was cut short. And another team I wanted to take a look at is the Ramparts, who, after skipping the previous draft entirely, they had quite a hefty number of top selections, and they did a triple shot in the first round, and their selections reminded us a bit of another team in the NHL who made 3 selections in a row in 2015. So maybe it was a thing back then, and maybe it was a curse to have 3 selections in a row. But I think the Ramparts were better than the Boston Bruins for sure with their selections. And yeah, overall these are the numbers. And to not to pile it on Cam, but the Tigers had as close as a skipped draft as they can come, as we saw that they had only 2 selections. The first was Evgeny Svechnikov, who didn't pan out, to put it mildly, and the other selection was their favorite, the second coming of their favorite career AHLer, not NHLer, for unfortunately for them. It was Michael Marsh, and yeah, Cam didn't have a lot to remember about this draft. And I think that's about it. Like I said, you can take a look at the spreadsheet linked below and see how you did or how the others did, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. And because last year we kind of started a tradition with random facts, so here is a random fact for you to enjoy. It might not be as useful as last year's, but still, whenever we can plug a red panda, I think it's worth it. They're so cute. So thank you guys for your attention, and we'll see you around. Hey, bye bye.